Madam President, on Friday evening, the nation learned the sad news that Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg had passed away. From her time as one of the few women in the Ivy League to being only the second woman ever appointed to the Supreme Court of the United States, Justice Ginsburg was and is an inspiration to generations of Americans. Throughout her remarkable life, Justice Ginsburg fought to secure equal rights and opportunities for all. She was a champion of women's rights in particular and broke down gender barriers throughout both her personal life and professional career. During this difficult and often divisive time, I think there's a lot we can learn from the way Justice Ginsburg interacted with those with whom she disagreed, especially her good friend, the late Justice Scalia. If you looked at a diagram outlining the ideologies of these two justices, these two would be at opposite poles. They shared very little in common in terms of the way they approached the job of being a Supreme Court justice. She was once asked about their close relationship, which stood in contrast to their vastly different views, and she said, "You can disagree without being disagreeable." Well, we've all heard that before, and it's absolutely true, unfortunately not practiced enough. But I think that sort of approach should be a reminder to all of us about the importance of treating each other with civility and respect, even when the person standing in front of you or on the opposite side of a computer screen has a vastly different worldview from our own. Our nation is grateful for Justice Ginsburg's 27 years on the High Court and her incredible contributions to our history. Sandy and I send our condolences to the entire Ginsburg family, as well as the countless colleagues and friends she earned throughout her lifetime. As Leader McConnell said this morning, the Senate is preparing to fulfill our constitutional duty of advice and consent. Throughout history, there's been a Supreme Court vacancy 29 times during a presidential election year, and each time the president has fulfilled his duty to put forth a nomination. Of those 29 election year instances, 19 occurred when the president and the Senate majority were of the same political party. But two of these nominees were confirmed. Our friends on the other side of the aisle have tried to compare this to the vacancy in 2016, but the facts were different. At that point, we had a president of one party in his final year in office and the Senate majority of another party. You'd literally have to go back to 1880 to find an example of the Senate confirming an opposite party president's Supreme Court nominee during an election year. The other difference is President Obama was not on the ballot in 2016, so it made sense for the American people to weigh in. Do you think we'd still be hearing the same arguments from our friends across the aisle if Hillary Clinton had become president and been able to nominate a successor to Justice Scalia? I think not. Voters cast their ballots and not only elected President Trump, but also a Senate Republican majority. And in 2018, they expanded that majority following the confirmation of Justice Kavanaugh. If the American people had elected a Democrat president and a Democratic Senate majority, I have no doubt that Senator Schumer would act on that nomination as well. Just as the Senate has always done, we will thoroughly review the qualifications and experience of whomever the president nominates. We should not rush that process. It should be conducted carefully and consistently with how the Senate has previously handled Supreme Court nominations. And when that process is complete, the Senate will vote on that nominee sometime this year. In some cases, the confirmation process has moved quickly. In the case of Justice Ginsburg, she was confirmed in only 42 days. In others, the process has taken longer and been significantly more contentious. I hope our colleagues on the other side of the aisle will try to restrain themselves from repeating the smear campaign that took place during Justice Kavanaugh's confirmation hearing. And including the Judiciary Committee hearings. I hope they'll refrain from making threats, like threats of packing the court in the future, which Justice Ginsburg herself opposed and warned would make the court partisan. Because if Democrats decide to add additional members to the United States Supreme Court when they're in power, then the pressure will be irresistible for Republicans to add other justices to the court. And it would be clearly a partisan institution rather than an impartial judge of the law and the facts. The president has every right to put forth a nomination, and we have an obligation to give him or her due consideration under our advice and consent responsibilities. As always, we will be thorough, and I hope, unlike last time, we can be civil and treat all with respect. I'm prepared to fulfill my responsibilities as a member of this body and of the Judiciary Committee, and I hope our colleagues on both sides are prepared to do the same thing. Madam President, there's no question this has been a difficult year for our country, with division and disagreement taking center stage. That changed for a moment last week when the Senate unanimously passed a bill that I had introduced called the Jenna Quinn Law to protect some of the most vulnerable members of our country. This bill carries the name of an inspiring young Texan who is one of 42 million adult survivors of child sexual abuse nationwide. As Jenna says, child sexual abuse is a silent epidemic. 1 in 4 girls, 1 in 6 boys are sexually abused before the age of 18. Those are shocking numbers. Sadly, these victims often stay silent for months, years, some for even a lifetime. As a result, they and countless other victims continue to be subject to abuse. Interrupting this cycle of sexual abuse is Jenna's mission, and one she's devoted her life to pursuing. She was the driving force behind what is now known as Jenna's Law in Texas, which requires training for teachers, caregivers, and other adults who work with children on how to recognize and report child sexual abuse. The signs of child sexual abuse are unique from other forms of abuse, and correctly identifying these signs is integral to bringing children out of a sexually abusive situation. After the Texas law passed in 2009, a study found educators reported child sexual abuse at a rate almost 4 times greater after training than during their pre-training career, 4 times greater. It was one of the first child sexual abuse prevention laws in the United States to mandate this kind of training, and now more than half of all the states have adopted a form of Jenna's Law. But many states, including my state, which have passed these laws, don't provide the funding for the training. Thanks to the legislation that passed the Senate unanimously last week, that's one step closer to occurring. This Jenna Quinn Law will take the successful reforms in Texas and other states and finally back them with some federal funding for that essential training. This bill will allow current grant funds to the Department of Justice, for example, to be used for specialized training for students, teachers, and caregivers to learn how to identify, safely report, and hopefully prevent future child sexual abuse. This legislation also encourages states with similar laws to implement innovative programs to address the scourge of child sexual abuse. It's a critical step to interrupting this cycle that is impacting children across the country and preventing more children from enduring this trauma. My partner in this bipartisan effort was Senator Hassan from New Hampshire, and I appreciate her help in moving this bill through the Senate. I hope our colleagues in the House will quickly take it up and pass Jenna Quinn laws so we can get it to the President's desk as soon as possible. The COVID-19 crisis has underscored the urgency of this legislation. In April of this year, nationwide reports of abuse or neglect dropped by an average of 40% compared to the same time last year. Normally, this type of drop in reports would be great news, but based on everything we know about the stresses and circumstances created by this pandemic, I fear that there is actually an increase in abuse that just isn't being recognized or reported. We need to make investments now in the health and safety of our children and bring this silent epidemic to an end. Speaker Pelosi has made clear that the House will stay in session until an agreement is reached on COVID-19 relief, so there's no reason for the House not to be able to act on this consensus legislation. I urge the House to take it up and pass it, which has received unanimous support in the Senate, and support America's children at a critical time like this. Madam President, I yield the floor.